Welcome back to the Energy Sovereignty Project and our recap for the second week in June. We'll make this pretty quick here. We'll get back to the studio and go over some of the numbers, including the numbers that we got following that short heat wave that we had. Again, I'm doing this one day late. This is actually the morning of the 15th. I was out of town yesterday, and so I have the vehicle on charge. As soon as I get a decent amount put back into the vehicle, we'll trot back over to the studio and close this out. But system's been running well, and I'm really looking forward to next week's update. We'll talk a little bit about that once we get back to the studio. Next week's update will be on the solstice, and that will put us exactly at the halfway point through the year as far as the solar contribution is concerned. So that should be kind of interesting. So with that, let's go ahead and get back over to the studio and we'll get a recap for this week. All right, welcome back to the studio. We had a pretty interesting week with some unseasonably high temperatures. Usually we don't see temperatures like that for about another month or so. And so that was a good kind of an eye-opener for us to see what is going to happen in mid-July and August. But let's go ahead and start here where we left off on the 8th. Pretty mild temperatures, and again, production right where it usually is for this time of year. 65.8 kilowatt hours of production. We wound up sending a little bit to the grid. And now the important thing here is that when we introduce a decent amount of driving to the vehicle, there is quite a bit of in and out to the power wall. Here we've got 28.3 kilowatt hours from the power wall, and then 46.2 kilowatt hours going into the power wall. And a lot of that, again, in this case, is due largely to the vehicle charging that we have. And here are the notes. Vehicle data there, and again, in preparation for an out-of-town trip, that was where the vehicle was charged to 100% just prior to heading out. And we're going to see a lot of this in the coming months, where we wind up using the vehicle quite a bit. Then you wind up really seeing the system being exercised in and out. And I'll point out one other instance where we do this later on this week. And so here we go, and here's the 9th, and so on the 9th I returned from a trip to the Bay Area, and as luck would have it, on this weekend I was the designated driver. So after driving 100 miles to the event, I wound up having to put another 60 miles or so on the car to get around, and that put me short by 55.5 miles. And so I did a quick bump charge at a supercharger to put just enough power into the car so I would barely make it back. And you'll see there that on my return I took quite a slug. We were at 97% charge when I got home, and I discharged all the way down to 43% in the system. 59.6 kilowatt hours to the vehicle. And again, you see that heavy in and out, not so heavy into the power wall, but certainly a huge chunk out. And so here's the notes. So as you can see, 20 kilowatt hours from the supercharger, And then the other vehicle data, the car was charged to 90%, but I wound up running a few errands that afternoon, and so we wound up ending with about a little over 80% of charge in the vehicle. Let's take a look at that for a second. And then on the 10th, it gets a little interesting. So the temperature is starting to creep up. And I worked late, so it was no big deal that I didn't charge the vehicle. It had plenty of power in it, and it was a decent production day, 60 kilowatt hours. And unfortunately, it didn't dawn on me at the time as to why the home usage was creeping up and production was a little off. And here are the notes. As it showed in the notes, that I did notice that we had some elevated AC use, but it hadn't kind of hit that runaway point yet. And then as you see here on the 11th, that was when we started seeing that we had a bit of a problem. 108 degrees, we had passed that tipping point where we got into a temperature runaway issue with the second story of the home. And so production was down and the power use was way up due to the AC and the circulating fan being on pretty much constantly throughout the day. And then making the situation worse was that I put 15 kilowatt hours into the vehicle. I'd figured that 30% would be plenty to get us through the evening as far as 30% charge in the system. And I'd also planned on the system being able to add just a little bit more charge later in the day. But not only did that not happen, but it wound up at the end of total solar day, the system had actually been drawn down to about 28% due to that AC kicking back on. And the AC didn't kick back off again until about 8 in the evening. Woo! And so here's the notes for that. And as we went over in that quick topic, the notes here talk about that tracking experiment that had to be aborted. And then with a little excess little excess power above and beyond what we used for the AC and everything else, it just didn't seem worth to continue with that. I mean, there wasn't, by the time you calculated all the home use, there really wasn't anything left to try and work with as far as showing what how that charge might be manipulated. So we'll do that later. And so then here's some more notes. And I go over the graph and the information available here. As you can see, the AC kicks on again in that evening. Unfortunately, I had already left for the studio at that point, and I didn't even realize the AC was running full tilt until, pretty much when I got back after midnight, and I didn't realize that it had been running because it was off when I got back. And the last page of the notes, I'll let you take that in for a minute here. But again, this was something we went over in the previous video. The takeaway here is that we're going to have to start tracking and making adjustments to the system on days where the heat exceeds 100 degrees. In a very similar fashion to the way that we track it on rainy days. The one huge benefit, though, is that when we do this on rainy days, we don't generally have much of a solar contribution. At least on sunny days, we know that if we conserve or do something else, we know that we have that power coming in. And obviously the same can't be said for extremely rainy days. And so here we have the 12th. The 12th got a little better. I was able to make some adjustments in the evening, ventilating the house. As I said back in that previous video, that proved to kind of be the trick here. And this is going to be really interesting to revisit at the end of July and into August. The issue there is going to be that we'll have a few nights that simply just never cool down. And so opening the windows at that point isn't really going to be of any benefit. And so that's going to be an interesting thing to see. You can see here the slightly reduced production for the day. And then our typical workout for the power wall. Starting at a 0% charge in the system, we were able to get up to 27% by the end of total solar day. And then here's the notes. And talking a bit about the solution path there. Basically what I said earlier about underestimating the impact that the heat would have, and then being able to solve this at least partially by ventilating the second floor later in the day. And then a few more notes and a couple of graphs. It was interesting to see the difference between a day when the system was just allowed to prioritize AC with no assistance, just basically using the circulating fan and seeing how it was able to cope, as opposed to a more cooperative approach with the home where those windows were opened to bring in some cool air and to get rid of some of the heat. And so then here on the 13th, things are starting to get more of a return to normal as the temperatures came down. No charge on the vehicle today. I still had my rental, or not rental, but the vehicle that Tesla gave me. My car was out having the windshield replaced, and we had lower temperatures. And here's the notes. Nearly 20 degrees cooler than the day before. And again, no vehicle data there. The vehicle was getting its windshield replaced, so I had the loaner. And so then on the 14th, right back to normal. 62.4 kilowatt hours of production, and got the car back. So I wound up putting 22 kilowatt hours to the vehicle when I was going to need it the following day. And so look at that for a second here. And then the notes. Ending the day with 127 miles on the vehicle. Checking the forecast for the next day, I saw that the heat wasn't going to be an issue, and I needed the car. I needed a 100% charge on the car, so I set the car to charge at 3 in the morning. And on the 15th, it did. So again, depleting the system to 8% in the morning by charging that vehicle was not an issue, because I knew that the day was forecast to be cool and basically a normal day for June. Had it been otherwise, this could have presented a problem. Obviously, I wouldn't have had enough charge to be able to put in the vehicle to do the trip. I would have had to have probably supercharged to do the trip. And also note again, on the days where we plan on using the car for 100 plus miles of driving, the system gets a huge workout. So again, from the Powerwall, 46.2 kilowatt hours, to the Powerwall, 50.2 kilowatt hours. So for those of you who are looking to emulate what we're doing here and have an electric vehicle or two, this is what you're looking at as a minimum requirement for doing that. 39 kilowatt hours were put to the vehicle that morning, and that power has to come from somewhere. And the notes. Basically what I just said, 39 kilowatt hours to the car because I needed a 100% charge for travel. If you don't have enough battery storage to draw stored sunlight from the previous day, then you're going to have to draw some power from the grid or supercharge the vehicle while you're away. And that brings us to the close of the second week. Again, as you've seen here, the focus for this time of year is power exchange from the PV production into the batteries, from the power walls back out again to the vehicles. And what we're going to do later this month, as we do the closeout for the month, because our production is quite high, I chose this month because of that reason, we'll be able to then do a little bit of detective work and try and figure out how we can do a better job in the future, both by our own choices as consumers, finding other solutions to match up components so that we can minimize our losses. As we discussed in this case, I've got, well, 7 inverters. I've got the 6 that are in the power walls plus the main inverter, and then the inverter that we have in the vehicle, or the charger rather that we have in the vehicle. And so we're going to go through and we'll examine all of that and try and see if we can tease out where our losses are and how much those losses represent, basically trying to find the missing power. So that should be an interesting experiment for later in the month. And as always, if you found this information to be interesting and this is channel the kind of thing that you're interested in seeing more of, please feel free to subscribe. That really helps us out. Also, this channel, perhaps more than many others, is very much content driven by the replies of our subscribers. So if you have questions or if there's other tests that you might like to see, feel free to comment and we'll be taking a look at those. But it's been amazing to watch the channel grow over these past few months, and I'm really looking forward to continue to bring this to you over the course of the remainder of the year. We've got a lot of interesting information to go over and bring to you at the end of this month, because it'll be the halfway point between the year. It'll allow us to give us an opportunity to make some very accurate predictions. And with that, I'll let you go until next week, or maybe a little before if I come up with something interesting to present to you guys. And best of luck with your own systems, and we'll be seeing you soon.